appreciate your time. It's early in the morning. We're all waking up, so no pressure. Like, I probably are saying things I don't know, so like, bear with me also. I am Mila. I work at AWS as an open source program manager. And today, what I want to talk about actually is something that's essential. However, it has been invisible for a while in open source. That's security. Well, we need to get excited about security because we don't have enough excitement. That's why we are not investing on that. Because like perfect security actually works like a transparent umbrella. It shows you perfectly under a storm. However, like you don't realize it. You don't see it. And the invisibility creates an issue because then you don't invest in it. So that's how open source security has been worked for a long time. Maybe still in some projects, they're the same. Like maintainers, on top of every work they're doing, they still do open source security. And that cannot be done in like immediately or with focus. They can only like compete against other priorities. And today we're talking about what will change when we have an open source ecosystem that has dedicated security engineer instead of relying on volunteers. I have been leading a AWS open source security funding in the past 3 years. In 2022, AWS committed that we are going to invest over 10 million in open source security. And a large chunk of the money actually goes to Alpha Omega. Alpha Omega is a security fund. It's a funding dedicated to open source security. And it's also formed in 2022. So why 2022? What's so special about 2022? Log4j? Oh, yeah. Of course, Log4j. So in November 2021, when everyone thinks about holiday, Log4j maintainer actually got a bomb dropped in their inbox. Within few days, limited exploitation just spotted everywhere. And in the middle of December, when everyone opening their holiday gifts, the maintainers actually open their laptop, continuously to work patch after patch after patch. And what makes it more complex and difficult is that Log4j is not just within software, but it's also within like layers of dependencies of other software. And the cleanup takes months or years. That adds on the complexity of fix, and that also adds on the time of cleanup. That's why in late 2025, about 13% of Log4j download still use the version that are vulnerable. Well, Log4j is not just a technical failure. It's actually a human one. Because we are looking at volunteers to drop everything, stay away from their family during holiday, and to just stop a global security wildfire. That will benefit everyone, like everyone using their software, every companies that monetize their software. However, the maintainers are the one bear all the cost and criticism. That's the reality of volunteer story. It often starts with incredible passion. You just want to do it. You think it's incredible. However, it ends with burnout. And XZ backdoor incident is another example of the security issue is not about the vulnerability, but it's about the maintainer. People who support open source critical infrastructure, they are often those who are not paid, who are undersourced, and who are exhausted. So burnout is not a theory, but a reality. However, when critical infrastructure depends on volunteers working nights and weekends, that's not sustainable. That's fragile. And Log4j actually is a wake-up call to the industry and government. industry after that start to invest more on open source. And one of the efforts is to fund dedicated security engineer for projects. For example, in 2023, Alpha Omega funded Python Software Foundation to hire Seth as the security engineer in residence. And at the same time, AWS initiated the funding to hire Mike Fiedler for PyPI security and safety. And later, the funding to Mike Fiedler was moved to Alpha Omega 2. Well, before that, security in Python ecosystem used to look like something that a vulnerability report arrived to the maintainer's inbox. However, the maintainer usually is a volunteer. They have their daytime job. They have their pull request to review. They have a family to feed, a community to support. So security work will only be done when they have time. It's usually nights, it's usually weekends, it's usually among priorities. So the response is also reactive. Someone reports a vulnerability, and the team will work very diligently to fix the issue. The dedication there is incredible. However, the challenge is also very obvious and simple. Security is competing with everything else that requires the project to run. That obviously limits us for what we can do with insecurity. Well, we need to acknowledge security oftentimes actually is a long-term coordination work among different projects. And volunteers usually doesn't have the time to stay on top of that for months. And secondly, modern software is not just a project. It has layers of dependencies. It's so interconnected. And to really understand the security risk there, it requires deep analysis. And that demands consistent and continuous time investment. Third, there are a lot of invisible work, but they are essential, like documentation, like advocacy. Those work usually are the hardest to be prioritized. So when we shift into a security staff model, a very encouraging observation is that we have way more output. Like, obviously, volunteers are incredible, but their constraint is also obvious. They don't have that much time. So in my conversation with Seth, he mentioned that usually a volunteer can complete one major deliver per year. However, a dedicated security engineer can do 3 to 4. Well, let's just look at how much Seth achieved within the first 3 months. In the first 3 months of Seth's time at Python, Python became a CVE numbering authority. That means less delay in vulnerability reporting. And also, he helped integrating the Python vulnerability advisory into open source vulnerability database. All those improvements are fundamental. That requires focus, persistence, continuous engagement with the community. Mike Fiedler also is very effective in improving the security within PyPI. One of the most impactful change actually is the two-factor authentication for maintainers. That greatly reduced the risk of account takeover. And at the same time, he helped build better infrastructure for detecting and reporting malicious packages. That's incredibly important for a growing ecosystem like PyPI. I actually want to talk about 2FA more, because it's a great example to understand the volunteer gap. PyPI actually introduced support for two-factor authentication in 2019. But for years, the adoption barely moved. That's because security is not just about building the feature. It's more about persuade the whole community to adopt into that, to take action, to make a change. So adoption requires continuous advocacy and engagement with the community and collaborating with thousands of developers. So when Mike take this at his full-time job, he built phased enforcement. He wrote posts about the plan. He participated in podcasts to make the whole plan obvious and clear to the community. And he also built the email campaign to notify people who have not adopted. As a result, by August 2024, 80% of users who have been logged in since January 2024, they have enabled 2FA. Another example for us to think deeper about what a dedicated security engineer can do is SBOM. SBOM helps us to understand what's within a software. That's the supply chain. It's complex. Well, for it to really work, it requires someone to dig deep into the question. You need to really understand how packaging works, how security data flows, and how we can build a solution that's realistically possible to Python ecosystem. And that's exactly what Seth did. He dived deep into the topic. He did his research, engaged with the community, and participated in the work group, which the work group conversation often happens during work hour. So Seth mentioned that if he's not hired, he will not participate in work group at all, because you cannot afford the time. And then all those allow him to transfer the idea into a concrete plan that adopted by the ecosystem. So that kind of deep and consistent investment is difficult for volunteers just because of the time constraint they have. But when you make it as someone's job, the progress is possible. Well, but don't think about dedicated security engineer will replace volunteers. Open source thrive because of volunteers' help. And the security engineers are there to enable volunteers. They create process, templates, and guidance that make it easy for volunteers to fix the issue. And previously, the Python security response team was a trusted cable in a private mailing list with no clear path to onboard. Well, because of no structure there, the same group of people, they work on everything. They triage, patch, coordinate, and disclose. To improve that situation, Seth drove the path 811. That formed how to join the team and providing a very clear path for new volunteers to become a part of it, to contribute their expertise. And we're already seeing results of that. The Python security response team is growing. Ever since August last year, they have onboarded 4 more security volunteers to the team. And at the same time, the whole process becomes more transparent and the ecosystem becomes more resilient. So we are at the end of this talk. I want to leave you with 2 simple ideas. First of all, funding dedicated security engineer, it works. They fill the real gap in open source security and ecosystem, and they drive measurable results. And second, if your company depends on open source, which is almost everyone, investing on open source security is not charity. It's investing in your infrastructure. So fund security engineer, support the ecosystem, and be prepared before the next crisis happens. That's the end of my talk. Thank you for being here. Hopefully this talk doesn't make you feel more sleepy, but wake you up. And I'm ready for questions.
Yeah, so what are some qualifications that you would look for if you want to hire a security engineer?
At Alpha Omega, we don't directly funding security engineer. We fund for the result of the work. So for example, when we talk with Python Software Foundation, we are not saying that, oh, we just need a security engineer, but we talk about what the work they're going to do, what kind of result they're going to drive. Yeah.
I'm looking at the GitHub monthly progress, and you funded Open Refectory about $180,000 last year. Their sole report is a README.
I'm sorry?
Their only report is a README. There's no report at all for 1 year. So if you're funding by results, does that mean you didn't pay them?
We paid them. That's some lingering process issue that we want to fix. Like, we definitely ask people to update their progress. We think it's important, but like we also don't force people to do that if they don't doing like a very proper job. But our logic there is make me want to fund you continuously. If you are not like meeting the expectation, then maybe we're not going to consider to fund you again. Yeah.
Thank you for your talk. That was nice. I wanted to ask, within your role at Amazon, when you've evaluated the results of what you've done here, how do you want to take that forward? Do you have plans to expand to fund security in other ecosystems and so on?
We definitely look at like the business coordination. Like the way I look at it is we are external facing, but at the same time we are internal driven. That means like we collaborate closely with our service team to understand, okay, where the dependency is, like how the investment can improve their security position or relate to their work. The more support we can get from internal service team to champion the work, the easier for us to get budget. Like ultimately, it's a business justification question. Like, can I persuade my finance manager and the business owner saying the investment makes sense?
When you make security your full-time job, job security becomes very important. How do you deal with that? So is it usually 1 year, the planning stage, and is it difficult to find people who are willing to apply for a position if they know it's only going to be for 1 year, or could it turn into something permanent?
I guess I don't think I'm the best person to answer this question, honestly, because, like, for example, with the Python Software Foundation, we are funding them, but they are the one getting the money and hiring the people. So I guess they have a better answer there. Debbie is here.
We've got more questions.
Hey, tying to his question or in your answer, and considering that Log4j was the jumpstart for this investment, does Amazon know like how much Amazon lost in or lose in a problem or lost on the Log4j issue?
I don't know. But I guess CISO knows, but definitely it's not a public report or things like that. Well, I think I actually really want to see a number like that, because that tells us how much how much it costs us to fix the issue, and comparing to the investment to prevent it from happening. Like, definitely it gives people, it's a great business justification. Like, the number makes sense. Yeah.
Big round of applause from Miaolai, please.
Thank you, everyone.